wanted to at that point. So I'm still, you know, kind of peeling through those stuff. Your school improvement projects, I just began sort of scanning through those today. And so I haven't gotten intensely into those, but those are my highest priority this week, along with getting the comments to you on the group projects, because as I said, I don't think there's going to be much problem with those at all. So we need to talk about that a little bit, but I want to use most of what we'll do in this session, and maybe the first, you know, we'll be about an hour or so maybe, and talk about the opportunity gap issue, because there are two or three comments that I think are important to dwell on a little bit, and in particular this notion of people talking about going back to normal after the pandemic, and how that's maybe not where we need to go. Maybe we need to spend a bit of time not doing the normal, but doing something that's a little bit out of the normal, and look at different ways of doing things. So hopefully that will happen over the next period of time, but you know, whether it does or not, I think is entirely up to you. You know, folks like me will rant and rave, and we'll write little opinion pieces, and we'll get on the soapbox every now and then in classes and things like that. But really addressing those opportunity gaps and addressing the inequities that are systemic within our educational system today is pretty much up to you. And you know, both in maybe your current capacity, but also in the capacity you're aiming toward, because I think you have to assume that change occurs really from the bottom up. It occurs at the school level. It occurs at the teacher level, and so teachers need support, and they need somebody, you know, kind of covering their backside, so that, you know, they don't get too far out on a limb, and some guidance on that. And so I do think we enter a period of time where we can make some substantial changes in school structures and in schools, but in schooling, but it's pretty much up to you. And you know, people like me are not terribly, you know, we've been harping on this for 30 years or more, and maybe it took a pandemic to get everybody's attention. I don't know, we'll see. So I have started the recorder. You know, what are your thoughts? How's the week? Questions you still have on any of the projects? I know I've responded to a few and met a couple of folks on, you know, projects, and hopefully that's been useful for you. When we get into the opportunity gap thing, we'll respond to that project a little bit more, because it's one that's important to kind of deal with. So, who wants to break the ice?
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment. So last week we went back full time, well, Monday through Thursday. We were 50-50, and now we are full capacity with all the students. So I teach 7th graders in the morning and 8th graders in the afternoon. I mean, I'm sorry, backwards. 8th graders in the morning and 7th graders in the afternoon. So we asked the 8th graders, do you guys like being back 4 days and seeing everybody? And they're like, no, we want to go back to being only 2 days. And I said, why? Because I can sleep late. Yeah. And other ones were like, because I can do all my work, get up early, get all my work done, and then I have the rest of the day. And we're like, okay. Then the seventh graders come and we ask the same questions and they're like, no, we don't want to be 2 days. We like being 4 days.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting to see the reactions between one grade and the other
Yeah,
one.
the differences. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just kind of, and it's even in general, the kids are having to adjust to seeing everybody, and some of them act like they don't know each other, even though, especially for the seventh graders, because this is like the first time seeing some kids, because we have 3 different schools that come through the middle school. So
Yeah. Are y'all operating on a full middle school concept, or does the 8th grade kind of slide into that junior high mode a little bit?
we just have 7th and 8th, and then they move to the high school.
Yeah. Typically, when you have the 2 grade levels, you have the 1 grade level is still operating, kind of a semi-middle school concept, and then the older grade level, it kind of slides into sort of the junior high school model a little bit, and you get a bit more content focused.
I teach 8th grade there, and we are very team oriented. So like me and the other science teacher do plan together, but we also have team meetings and plan with our teams. We do still have the AA time.
Yeah.
So we do operate on a middle school principal, but our principal has been a middle school principal for like 30 years.
Yeah.
And she was taught at Appalachian on the middle school concept. So I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, it does.
The only thing we don't do, our first year we did have, everybody had a homeroom, so our cat time could be smaller, but this year due to COVID, we have gone back to just the core teachers having homerooms.
Yeah. Other changes that people have seen? Does any other have the rest of you gone back to a fuller schedule?
I'm 5 days a week, and that was a very long week last
Yeah, I
week.
can imagine.
I'm used to well, I've been in the building the whole entire time, even since last year, but I'll have to say those 5 days, whew, although there were many children who still were remote learning, it was still a different area. But I will have to say we were shocked. We had people who like had fussed the whole time about get them back in the building, need to be there, need to be there. Guess what? By Tuesday, those same people were saying, get them out, get them out, get them out. They were going back to the house.
Yeah.
So this is Beth. My camera is not working. But we've been back full time since October for our K-5 kids. But just 4 days because we still have about 100 kids that are fully remote. And it's been going okay, but we're the only school in our area that has been doing that since October. And so it's been a little bit of a challenge, but it's been good for the most part.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm at a high school and we brought our kids back on Plan A today. And of course, we still have some that are fully remote, but it was just really cool to see kids in the hallway and coming in from the buses. And it was just, the energy was just different. So that was really nice to see. My own kids have been face-to-face from the beginning of the year, since August, but they're in an independent school and their class sizes are teeny. So I've kind of seen it both ways.
Yeah, I think there's, when we talk about schools and purposes of schools, we used to talk a lot about, what Dewey called the acculturation factor. That, that when you had kids in schools, part of the role is to help educate them. And obviously education is an important part of the role, is the primary role, I guess. But an equally important part, although it may not be, the most important, is the whole acculturation function, the idea of acculturating kids to society. And, that was the reason that we developed civics courses and, things like that, because you wanted it to be a place where kids learned how society worked, how, the culture in which they were going to live and function in, how it worked. And that acculturation notion was an important thing. And so when we establish school accreditation sort of standards, or you begin to see accreditation standards established in different states and across the country, one of the first things that got established was length of the school day. And the original length of the school day was designed to be 6 hours or so of instruction, and then 1 hour or so on the front side to get them there and get them settled and get them in their places, and 1 hour or so on the backside to get them settled and get them, get them on the bus and get them home and all of that. And it was always built around this notion that work shifts were 8 hours. And so you had, you were training them for what it would be like to go to work in a factory, go to work in, primarily an industrial setting, because that was kind of what we were acculturating them to work in, is in a culture that's very industrialized. And so not only did then it serve an acculturation function, but it served a babysitting function, childcare function, because as the parents went to work, the kids were in school. And so schools served, 2 or 3 functions. And if you look at the structure of schools today, we're still trying to serve those 3 functions, even though 2 of them have pretty much flown out the window. We're still trying to be babysitters, even though people don't work straight 8-hour shifts. They work rotating, they work 3 jobs, they work whatever. And the acculturation piece is really, we're not acculturating them to one type of society or one type of culture. We're trying to be, a more multiple cultural sort of facets to it. And so, a lot of things that we used to do in schools, or the reason we did them in schools, their primary reason, is no longer there. And I think some of us thought, maybe a positive out of the pandemic experience would be that people could see that, learning can take place in lots of different settings in lots of different ways. And we don't necessarily have to fall right back into the 5-day-a-week, 8-hour school days, primarily, by considering travel time. So that, you have all that happening that we put a plan in place for well over 100 years ago. The society and culture have changed, but school structures have not changed. And it's kind of an interesting, sort of observation, if you take the time to think about that this notion of how we built schools and how we operate schools is 100 years old. And it was built for a culture that was quite different 100 years ago. And maybe we get the opportunity to make a few changes in it. I don't know, but thoughts? Any thoughts about that?
One good thing we've done in 8th grade, and 7th grade couldn't do it just because of the way their kids work, but we still have 1 virtual class per team that's 100% virtual. So our lower kids, we were able to keep them split up into their small groups by having like one group do the 8-day schedule and another group do an alternative schedule. So now we have our higher kids and our regular egg kids are like 30 to a class, but our kids that need extra help are 15 to a class. And that's been very helpful with that. We're just using our planning time to do part of our virtual classes, but we're able to give them more attention that way. And it's really helping us in social studies and science where you don't have another teacher.
Right.
So that we would love to keep it that way. I'm sure we won't be able to, but we would love to keep it that way.
I would love for it to go to 15-1 overall. I mean, we keep quibbling over this thing of whether, you know, student teacher ratio matters or not. And if you actually look at the good research on that and the more compelling research on that and the solid research on that, the answer is, hell yeah, it does. I mean, you can get a lot more with 12 kids than you can with 24 kids. I mean, that's, you know, even if you adopted a management model, a business model, we say a supervisor should supervise no more than 12 people, because that's the span of control. Well, why is the span of control different in schools? How are you managing 24 or 30 or 35 kids or whatever? I mean, that's just, it's ridiculous. And then they say, well, you know, it's all about building buildings. Well, you know, you don't have to build buildings. I think we've discovered in doing some of the virtual work that you don't necessarily need buildings for everything. And so it is a, you know, some of these things, I hope we see some changes as we go forth, but I don't know. You know, I'm an optimistic cynic. In that I'm optimistic that we'll do the right things, but I'm cynical in that we generally find a way not to. And so we'll see.
And I was going to say, speaking for the EC teachers in this class, when you have the special needs kids in the regular classes or even in a self-contained class, and the numbers keep getting higher and higher, and our students keep getting no help, and then people start fussing, they're not passing the EOGs. Well, yeah, they're pretty smart. They're not going to pass the EOGs because they're not getting the help they need.
Yeah, they're not progressing. They're not, you know, they're going to progress more slowly perhaps, but they will progress, but, you know, but they're not progressing because, as you say, they're not getting what they need. They're not getting the support structures and not getting the, you know, you're dealing with too many kids to support, and, you know, it's a little bit of ridiculous, but all that's a bummer. Let's talk about something that's really even more of a bummer. Let's talk about opportunity gaps. What did you see in your schools?
I was going to say, one of the things in our school that we see, we don't have a lot of minority groups. We basically just one group. But I talked to my principal and she said the biggest thing we're seeing right now at our school is parents and grandparents and other family members are trying to raise and teach students, and they don't understand the concepts themselves to teach them. And then when you throw in the technology piece, for example, like Canvas or Google Classroom or Seesaw, things like that, the family members don't understand anything about how to manipulate it. And we are seeing a big decline in the achievement gap for students, not just the students who are remote only, all the students. They're struggling when we have a remote days, they're not doing anything. And we send paper copies for the ones that don't feel comfortable getting online, but still they're struggling. So that's our biggest problem right now. And that's what I noted in my paper.
Yeah, okay. Leslie, you had your,
Yeah, we're kind of the same way. We're 86% white, but our largest subgroup is our economically disadvantaged, which is about 30% of our school. But I think a starker comparison is that the haves and the have-nots are so far apart that it's not even remotely comparable, because we have kids who live in $1 million homes on the lake, and then we have kids who live in single wide trailers with tarps on the roof. So it's really stark. But I've had a frustration all semester with 2 math teachers who grade homework for accuracy. And in one particular class, only 29% of the kids are passing. And so another teacher who he kind of models his classroom by does not grade for accuracy on homework. And he's a phenomenal teacher. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. Some of the best growth in the county, and just amazing at what he does. And he's being successful. He's only got 20% of his kids who aren't passing. And so we had this conversation, and I was trying to get him to see that, the thing that kept resonating with me in the one video was when the gentleman said, yes, my kid's gifted. She's got 2 PhDs at home. That's her gift. And it really resonated with me that, some of these kids go home and they have engineer dads or mechanically minded moms or whoever that can help them. And then some are going home to take care of their siblings. I talked to 3 kids in that class for my paper, and one said that he didn't have a calculator and he had to use the one on the Chromebook, and it drove him crazy to use that one because he had to split a screen. And if you have a Chromebook, the screen's this big anyway.
Yeah.
So it frustrated him. Another said he was terrible at math anyway, so why even bother? And then one kid was basically mom until her parents got home between 7 and 8 every night. These kids don't have the same opportunities. And so that was one of mine. Exposure. These kids don't see people who aren't like them. They don't see the world in some cases. So the field trips and whatnot. And then just facilities. We're one of the oldest schools in the system. And another particular school has 2 gyms and 3 times the size of our facilities, which is a financial issue. So those were really what I identified, simply because I had to look past race to find this. But yeah, that's what we saw, or I saw.
Yeah. Well, at the heart of everything. I mean, if you really think the thoughts, at the heart of everything, this country is a rich and poor country. I mean, we're fantastically rich at the top end. We're bitterly poor at the bottom end. It just happens that the way in which things have happened over the last 40 years or so, we'd had governments in place that have sort of fostered a greater divide, and the middle class is kind of floated away a little bit, and there's not as much what we might call the middle class, and so people fall within a couple of categories. And you layer race and some other things on the top of that. I think why race is such a difficult issue to deal with in schools, because it's very often it intersects with that rich and poor notion. Is that not only are you poor, but you're black, or you're Hispanic, or whatever. And then on the other side of it, you could rotate around that and say, not only do I have, suffer the inequities and the systemic stuff because I'm black, but I also don't have a lot of money. And we've had a society that for many, many years, kind of had the 2 crusts, but there was a middle that was, kind of a middle class. And now that middle class has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And so there's no transition zone. I mean, you can't fight out of the, poverty into a middle class and then, catch fire and, move into a richer class. You can't do that. You can't. And so it becomes almost an impossibility to, if you're poor, it becomes almost an impossibility to figure out, how do you get not to be poor? And that was not always the case. I mean, I'll use myself as a case. When I grew up in a farmhouse that had an outdoor john and had we didn't have hot water, and mom cooked over a wood cook stove. And, my first job, first thing in the morning, was about 4:30 or 5, was to get up and start the stoves, because we heated the house on the cook stove and a couple of fireplaces and a coal stove that was in my parents' bedroom. And that was the only one that stayed on all night, was the coal stove. And so, the rest of the time, middle of the winter in the mountains, we were under, 8 quilts and stuff like that. And so you're getting dressed under quilts and all that. But, you know, you didn't feel totally hopeless because you had a family and you had a family structure and the community, you know, everybody in the community took care of everybody else. And, you know, if somebody's crops didn't work out too well one year, everybody would help. And, you know, if somebody's house got damaged or burned or whatever, the whole community would help build it one back. And, yeah, so that was kind of the nature of the world in which we lived. And, you know, I always felt like education would be a way out, and it was. You know, it was the way out for me. It was of 5 kids, of 4 boys, I was the first one to finish high school. I was the first one to get a college degree, the first one to get a PhD. You know, and so, you know, that was possible because I had people helping me along the way, you know, good counselors, good teachers, you know, all that. So there was a way up. And, you know, today, I'm not too sure there is a way up for a lot of kids and for a great many kids. So at the core of it is that inequity in income. But then you layer other systemic inequities on top of that, like race or like immigrant status or, you know, whatever inequity you want to layer on top of that. Female. I mean, you know, it's only in the last 10 or 15 years that we've had, you know, pretty vibrant STEM programs beginning to emerge to encourage, you know, young girls to consider science and math and think about being an engineer and stuff like that. And we're starting to see the effects of that at my level. Because when you look at engineering schools or medical schools or law schools, you'll find that most of the students, in most cases, at least a plurality of the students in those schools are women or females. And so they're going to be the, you know, the decision-making class not too far down the line. We're seeing a lot of it now in politics, but we're going to see a lot more of it in business in a fairly short period of time, because that's who's in MBA programs and engineering schools and medical schools and law schools, as opposed to, which in my time was about 80% male, probably, if not more. So we're, you know, but it takes a long time. It takes a long time for cultural evolution and cultural upheaval to occur. And I think we're just on the, maybe just the cusp of it right now. You know, I don't know that I'll live long enough to see a full emergence of it, but I do hope that my granddaughter benefits from it. And so, you know, you kind of look at that and you say, what are these opportunity gaps? Well, they're created systemically by the structures that we have created. And they can be remediated, but only if we're willing to change those structures. I mean, I look around and, you know, see, go to a big city and see the guys on the street that are homeless, that are, you know, my age or a whole lot younger than me, but look my age. And, you know, you have to, if you look at yourself, you have to say there, but for the, you know, there, but for chance, go I, you know, to not stray into the religious, but just to say, you know, just luck of the draw. They're where they are, I'm where I am, but, you know, I got opportunities maybe they didn't get. So you have to, I mean, you have to realize that we do live, and everybody on this screen enjoys a certain privilege because you're educated. That is a privilege. And so, you know, most of us do it because we want to share that privilege and we want to educate others, get others to that point. But, you know, we have to realize that, you know, we have a certain privilege that maybe our students don't have, or maybe school's a little bit more difficult for them, or maybe they, lots of reasons. Getting up early in the morning is not viable for them because they stay up late at night working a job to help the family, or, putting kids to bed, babysitting their kids because mom or dad works a second shift or a third shift. And so you've got, you have to realize that all these kids suffer some opportunity gap, or a lot of them do, more than we think. But the big prime motivator is money. It is the income levels and the unwillingness to try to do something about that. Other thoughts, observations on your schools? What'd you see?
I noticed that about my school too, the inequity with the children. We have some kids failing, and when we would get with the parents to find out what was going on, they would be like, well, they can't do Google Meets till 5:30 because that's when I get off work. Or I have one girl who sleeps in class because she's taking care of an infant at night because her parents work third shift.
Yeah.
And this is 8th grade. That's not their kids, but they have to help. And a lot of it is culture. A lot of my Hispanic kids or my Asian kids, it's expected that they do that.
Mm-hmm.
The oldest daughter takes care of the kids. That's just what she does. And so that is a big equity gap for those girls.
Yeah.
And they can have brothers the same age and the brother does nothing because that's not his job.
Yeah. There is that cultural component. It is, I hate to say this, but I've got a monstrosity of an old house here that we basically spent most of our livelihood on over the years trying to resurrect. And the only bad thing about that is about the time you get right where you want it, something else breaks or something else falls apart or whatever. So then you have to attack that. But they're during the summertime or warm weather, there's always workmen in our neighborhood here because there's a bunch of these old houses here that date from the 1890s into the early 1900s. And so, they're all large and they're all beautiful houses and they're all wonderful to raise kids in and all that sort of stuff. But man, they're a pain, and the maintenance on them is continual. And so every summer, well, anytime the weather breaks to warm, they're like, you can hardly park some days because of all the workmen on the street working in the different houses. And, it used to be hard to find, good workmen, but I live in a community that has probably about a 30 to 35% Hispanic population. And their work ethic is absolutely incredible. And you can always find good people to do what needs to be done. And, it's primarily, the base of our, sort of hand tool workforce around here in this community is very much an immigrant base, because that's who's willing to do the work and do a good job with it. So it's culture is a big part of it. And so when if you're the, in some Hispanic households, you find that, the males, the females take care of the smaller siblings. The older males sometimes work, they get a job, or they are in charge of driving mom and dad around, or interpreting for mom and dad when they go to the doctor, or they go to court, or they go whatever. And so it's it is a different culture, and there's a certain inequity in that, and there's a certain loss of opportunity gap. I'll be interested to see when we get the research back, and there are lots of researchers out there looking at it now as to which groups fared best during the pandemic. And I'll be interested to see which groups, I mean, we know one groups that the parents couldn't provide the support that the kids needed. We know there's a group there that's probably not going to do as well. And we know the group, you know, the parents with 2 PhDs, they're probably going to do a little bit better because their parents were, you know, kind of driven towards success. But, you know, I'm interested in to see how the cultural breakout is. You know, is it the Asian kids or the Hispanic kids or the white kids? I mean, who did best? Who managed to keep the pace? Who managed to even prosper in it? And it'll be interesting to see.
Dr. Bolt, I have experienced some of that with my ESL students,
Mhm.
especially, you know, as of late, you know, I had to go back after I was sick and I had to really do a mad dash to finish, you know, our state testing. Stamina is a real issue now for students because they're I don't know if what's happening, but my students have completely lost stamina. But I have a great concern for ESL students. I mean, when we wear masks on our faces, it makes it very difficult for students to develop their communication skills.
Mhm.
But also, just as a population, I feel like, you know, all of the ESL students that I serve have really suffered through the remote learning in terms of access to education or not having support at home that, you know, can provide them the leadership they need just to get online. So many of us take for granted that, you know, when our kids need to get online, we have access or we have background
Right.
knowledge to understand how to get them there. And they just don't have that support to say, oh, you know, this is the start button, this is the power button. They really have struggled.
Well, and think about how this pandemic and the way we dealt with the economic shutdowns and all like that happened. The one group that never shut down were quote unquote essential workers. They were the healthcare workers. They were the truck drivers. They were the loaders in distribution centers. They were, you know, that's the people that didn't shut down. And so although their kids were home, they weren't. And so if in a lot of places, a lot of times, and I know this from kind of personal knowledge, instead of a kid being at home with their mother or their father who's helping them, they're at home with a grandfather or a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle, an older aunt or uncle, who really just don't have a great grasp of the language themselves. And some of them speak perfect English, but they really don't have a great grasp of the language. And, you know, some of them don't speak English at all.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I have a student who is practically raised by an older sibling who has PTSD, whose mother brought them from halfway around the world, and she
Mhm.
drives from High Point to Wilkesboro every day to work in a chicken factory and back and forth, and is only home for a very short amount of time, and she cannot be late for work.
No.
You know, and you know, it's a struggle for that child. It has been a real struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, and these are the opportunity gaps that happen to everyday individual kids. And, you know, some of it fits into a model, some of it doesn't. Some of it we can deal with, we can develop programs to deal with. Some of it we can't. Some of it's just systemic. But as long as we keep this model that says, you know, you got to be at school 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, stuff like that. I mean, this is a 100-year-old model, probably 130-year-old model. And, you know, I think we will discover that there are kids that prospered this past year educationally. And part of it is they don't have to come to school and spend 8 hours at school. I have a good friend of mine, her son, she homeschooled her son and daughter for a number of years. And then her son went to the middle school, and traditional story, the elementary, they homeschooled him, and then he went to middle school and all like that. And then he went to high school this past year when they shut down and they were doing remote learning. And, Gracia said, he'd just knock it out. He'd get up and do his chores on the farm, and then he would go and just, knock it out in 3 or 4 hours. And the thing that he hated was having to sit in the Zoom session, because he would, he'd do all the readings, he'd do all his homework, he'd do all that. And, then he would get a little disgruntled later in the day because he was still watching a TV screen that he didn't need to be watching, because he had basically finished everything. And so he wanted to be one of the first kids to go back face to face, because it wouldn't last as long as sitting in front of that screen. And now he's not doing as he's not as enthusiastic as he was when he was home. So, the kids have responded to this in lots of different ways. And so we kind of have to look at them in lots of different ways. We can't develop a model that they all fit into. There are individual opportunity gaps, and then there are cultural opportunity gaps. There are gaps that impact a lot of kids, and then there are gaps that just impact particular kids.
I was going to say, I was watching one of the videos that you linked on, and As You Learn, and one of the individuals speaking said that all this starts in the womb with motherhood, as soon as they're born. And my wife and I are both foster parents, and we have seen many kids come and go in our house, and every single child in our house that we have had has had gaps, and that's all came from malnutrition, not exposure to books, not exposure to communication, just raising themselves. So some of the stories we have heard, and I'm just thinking, okay, where are these kids going to be in just 5 years from now? And sad to say, some are going to be in jail or dropping out of school, because it all started back when they were 1 and 2 years old. So it's so important for the early childhood education and early identifying of kids who have disabilities and like some gaps are not fine, they're already seeing. So it's so important.
Yeah, I had a good friend that, she used to talk about how schools dealt with, heroin babies and alcohol babies and things like that. And almost all are at some level developmentally delayed. And some it starts early, and some it doesn't start until, you don't really see the big effects of it until a little bit later, until they start to get into that whole literacy age, and it's just not coming to them. But that they're almost always developmentally delayed. And she said, think real careful about that term. It doesn't say developmentally stopped. It says developmentally delayed. Even kids that are developmentally delayed can progress if we understand the delay and we treat it, and we operate under the assumption that, okay, this kid has got some, they're going to be a little bit later, or maybe they're going to need a little help with this or a little help with that. But man, oh man, when they get, when they catch fire, they can still be a ball of fire. But you do have to figure out and help and have programs in place and resources in place to identify what those delays are and what's the root of them. And the testing we do is not terribly useful, because it's based upon normal developmental baselines. And so it doesn't really tell us, what we need to know. We just have to understand that some kids that have that experience and have that background will be developmentally delayed, and we have to kind of figure out, what's the best we can do for them. How do we help them get there? But she said it's very important to remember that it's developmentally delayed. It's not developmentally stopped. The mind, the body is programmed to move forward. And it's just a matter of, figuring out what we need to do to help them do that. And, it's, in a lot of ways, it's similar to what we're now beginning to learn about autism and how, autistic kids, may have communication issues or perceptor issues or things like that. But, it doesn't mean that they can't learn. It doesn't mean that can't be successful. It just means that we have to give them the structures and the supports they need to get, to move forward. And I'm hoping that we don't have too many kids that are suffering, their own sort of PTSD based on this pandemic, that don't have their own trauma issues. But I think there'll be a number of those, and I think it'll be a large number. And we might not see the effects of that for another year or two. They may be excited to get back to school, see their friends, things like that. But, they will have, if the trauma was bad enough and had enough of an impact on them, they'll eventually, the trauma will catch up with them. And we have to be able to see that when it comes and deal with it and help them get through it. But, these are issues that are, maybe shorter term, but these are issues we're going to have to deal with. And you're the people that are going to be on the forefront of that. And to me, it's not, it's not a sad thing. It's a powerful thing to think that you have the opportunity to help these kids move forward. And so, you have to have your own sort of improvement notion in your head. What do you have to do to get better at what you do to deal with these kids that are going to be, have some needs that we're not prepared to do and under the system that we have. So it is this notion of opportunity gap is very, there are some that are very clear cut and we know what they look like, and we know that money's at the root of a lot of it, and we know that when you layer that with racial or cultural identity, you get even a greater opportunity gap. But we have to figure out how do we change the system so that doesn't become the default, but it becomes the exception.
Dr. Bold, I'd just like to say our school district has also talked about the social emotional aspect of the pandemic and the effects that it's likely to have on the students when they come back to school.
Mhm.
And we have really tried to take a more proactive approach to it instead of a reactive approach, and we're really anticipating that next fall we will see a significant increase in that need for social emotional support, and we're already planning for that well in advance, because we know that we're already back. Our kids are already back on Plan A. K through 5, we came back in October, and our middle school, high school started back last week full time. But and even just since in the last 2 weeks, we've already seen some behavior incidences at the middle school, high school. Just kids being face to face with each other full time.
Yeah,
It's already
flashpoints.
starting. Yeah, it's already starting. And so we know that when we go back full time 5 days a week, right now we're still at 4. When we go back 5 days a week, it's going to be
it's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of kids. And we're still going to be offering the online remote learning, but um, you know, I just don't. We know that it's going to be a significant need, and so
Yeah.
we're definitely trying to be proactive with it.
Well, that's a smart plan, because that's what you
Yeah.
need to do. I mean, and there will be flashpoints. You can't, you can't plan around all those. Some are just going to happen. I mean, but you don't want them to become, the norm. You want them to become, and you want to provide the supports, and they're not necessarily always, it's always not purely a discipline issue.
Right.
It may be an emotional or a communication issue or whatever. And so, there needs to be a lot, as you say, proactive sort of notions about, how do we deal with these things? Because they're coming, folks. They are coming. These kids they're in trauma, and some of them will get through it and blow it off, and some won't, and a lot of them will be somewhere in between. They'll kind of have to deal with it at their own pace, but it will show up eventually. It always sort of does.
Something that I find interesting is that I feel like with everything that has happened with COVID, teachers had been able to kind of go in parents' houses. So before, the kids will come every day, and if there were kids that were failing, maybe we will contact those that have issues. But because them being completely online 2 days or full time, I don't know about the rest of you, but I know in our school we have to make phone calls, and the teachers have to call and talk to the parents, or the parents will be in a Zoom call, and you get to see what their houses look like. And so I feel like we have been able to see also more problems, or the things that the kids go through and on a regular base that we didn't before, because they were just in school.
Yeah.
And also something that I noticed with my project is we get kids from 3 schools. One is your low one, and we can tell about the way they dress. We can tell about a lot of things. Then we have one that is the middle one. That is, that's where my daughter goes. It's kind of like the medium. And then we have one that is the rich kids. The moms don't work. So when those kids were at home, the moms were helping or the parents were helping. And then you have the other ones, like my daughter. I mean, both of us went to college. And I think, like you mentioned, having the parents having a college background makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Because now most of the times, the ones that are not doing well is because they don't have that support. And before, they didn't really need it much because they would come to school every day. So we were there. The teacher was doing everything. But then once they went home, it's like, guess what? Now somebody else is going to have to do it. And then it's when we find out, oh, this kid lives with grandparents. There is not a mom, or dad is gone, or dad is in jail. And I think, and I had conversations with our guidance counselor, and I was very amazed, and I was glad to have those conversations with her, because there were a lot of things that I was not even aware.
Right.
Like she told me, for instance, a lot of times just because the kids are Black, some teachers assume that they don't have a dad. And she said, and that's not the case. I have been to homes where white kids don't have a dad or a mom, and they live worse than some of the Black kids. And I think that's kind of the same even with some of the Hispanics or even the Asians. Some kids have that low life, like some white, but then you might have some other parents that maybe are professionals or have some other level, so they receive different types of help.
Yeah, you can't stereotype. That's kind of the message there. And you have even some of the kids that come from a very impoverished sorts of backgrounds, and you know, there's the one thing that you can never account for is, you know, just the drive and I used to call it the wattage of the kid, you know. You have, you know, kids that come from very, very poor backgrounds, but, you know, they have the kind of the innate wattage to be successful if they have the opportunity to be successful. And that's kind of what these opportunity gaps are all about. I mean, and there are kids on the other end that, you know, come from, you know, professional parents and well-to-be that don't really have that drive. And, you know, they're just average kids. They're, you know, they're not high-powered super wattage kids. They come from a nice home. They come from a nice place, but they tend to have an opportunity that the kids that come from the poor home never get. And so it, you know, that's the thing that's built into the system, you know, and this notion of when we started, you know, putting kids in different tracks and things like that, you know, it was the same thing. And I don't know whether I've told you this. I don't particularly care about the multi-tiered system, but I know it's been the, you know, the thing that North Carolina has sort of sold its soul over. But you know, every bit of evidence we have from around the country, you know, doing the multi-tiered system, is that it basically resegregates schools. And you know, it wasn't intended to do that. I know that, or maybe it was. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to be cynical enough to say that it was designed to do that, but you know, it has that effect. And so that's, you know, things like that we have to be aware of, and we have to be aware of the, you know, the damage we're doing to kids, and try not to do any of that. But at the same time, we have to be aware of, you know, how can we help these kids, and that's the thing we have to really work on.
Dr. Bo, another inequity I found was not just with what the kids have and not have, but also the teachers they have. If your teacher doesn't know how to set up a learning management system,
Yeah,
those kids struggle because they can't find what they're looking for to do the work. And, you know, our school system does trainings, we provide trainings, but some people just, they do not know how to set it up. And I've got one of our other teachers has kids in high school who are AB students that are failing or were at the beginning of the year because their teachers couldn't figure out how to set up a Canvas course and had work in Canvas, and they had stuff in the website, and they had stuff in 4 or 5 places, and the kids couldn't figure out where to go to find stuff. And I mean, that's not fair to
Yeah.
the kids. It's not their fault that the teachers don't know what they're doing. So this whole COVID thing has really brought up inequities across the board.
and it was, and a lot of that's a lack of resource, not having, you know, resource personnel there to help train the teachers in smaller settings and, you know, smaller numbers. But it's we just didn't have time. I guess we just didn't have time to put the resources in place, and some of that's but I guess I do not suspect that we will see each other next week. I have no intention to, unless you, I get a message from you that we need, you know, you want to see me face to face, or you want to yell at me over Zoom or whatever. I'm, for the next few days, kind of burning my grading eyes out, trying to get all these things read and some comments back, and just be aware that I have 36 grad students that I'm dealing with right now, and I'm stupid enough to do a whole bunch of projects in all 3 classes. You would think after 40 some years I would learn that lesson, but I guess I'm developmentally delayed in that area. I think you have to kind of do what needs to be done and then try to catch up, try to stay on top of it. But I will get there. And as I said, I was pleased to see when I looked at the group projects that they all looked, as I kind of went through them, scanned through them one time, they all looked in pretty good shape. I mean, I think there might be a little thing or two here or there, but I'm not looking at big stuff. And most of my comments on your school improvement stuff will be supportive. You know, not, you know, you should have thought of this, more like, well, how would you what would you do here? How would you make this work? Or, you know, is there another way to measure this or whatever? It'll be that kind of comment. So I will stay away from negatives and, you know, I know that doesn't work. Negative reinforcement never works except with little dogs that you're trying to break up some very bad habits. But anyhow, and we have a little dog. She's almost 3 months old now. She's going to be cute, and she's going to be a lovely dog and a real sweetie. But here's a warning: do not get a miniature schnauzer if you are older than 50, because at 70, you will not be able to keep up with her for a pretty good while. And good portion of my time these days is spent in trying to reinforce the fence so she doesn't get out again and run someplace else. So we're, you know, just a warning, just a thought, you know, you might go with. Okay. So I guess you're waiting for me to get stuff back to you so you can finish this stuff off. As I said, I do not think that will be much of an issue. I need to go through and make sure I've checked off and have spent a little bit of time with your reflections and made any comments that I thought might need to be made. I believe reflections are your thoughts, you know, and so I don't attempt to correct your thoughts. I just, maybe if I have a notion of something to respond to it, I'll say a little something, but otherwise, you know, don't expect me to say you've got the wrong reflection or the right reflection or whatever. Those are your thoughts. But the two biggies, you know, the school improvement plan, your individual capstone, and the team project, you know, you'll get what comments are needed on those. But once again, I'll try to keep those in a most positive vein, so we can get this thing wrapped up and you can get on about your business, and I can take a 1 week break, go see my grandkids, and come back and teach 3 classes this summer with 20 people in a class. So, but one on will be easy. It's just a flat out stats class. That's a piece of cake. It's classes like this that are demand a little bit more thought. All right, folks. It's been interesting, and I hope you have gotten a little bit out of it. You know, it's kind of it's hard to say, but you know, be positive, look forward, and you know, when you get in charge of things, make good things happen. Yeah, be good to the world, be good to kids. So y'all have a good evening. If you need me, give me a yell. I mean, I'm not off the clock yet, so if you need me, give me a yell.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Y'all too.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.